Good morning. The subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare witnesses of the subcommittee at any time. We welcome everyone for this morning's hearing on controlled substances, federal policies, and enforcement. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today as we move forward in a better direction for our communities and for our country. It is now my pleasure to recognize the ranking member of this committee, my co-leader on this committee, and that is the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, for his opening statement.
This morning's hearing should be called Biden's Border Crisis is Fueling Drug Smuggling, which in turn will fuel drug addiction, death by drug overdose, and economic and societal distress. Additionally, how can we have a serious hearing on federal policies if we don't have a single witness from the federal government? No one from the Department of Justice, no one from the Drug Enforcement Administration, no one from the Department of Health and Human Services, no one from the Department of Homeland Security, and here we are. I think there should be agreement that federal drug policy must include border security and an enforcement approach that is balanced with other critical public health and safety initiatives. Such an approach is critical to enforce drug laws and help combat the current drug crisis in America that has reached unprecedented levels even during the coronavirus pandemic. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported that synthetic opioids, predominantly illicitly manufactured fentanyl, commonly laced with other poisonous drugs like heroin and cocaine, appear to be the main driver of the dramatic increase in overdose deaths in the United States. Just this month, the Drug Enforcement Administration in its latest National Drug Threat Assessment underscored that the production and supply of fentanyl to the United States is being driven by Mexican drug trafficking organizations, while China remains a main source of supply for precursor chemicals. Drugs, people, and other contraband are now able to flow across the border because CBP is focused on caring for aliens, flooding the borders, and therefore is less focused on enforcement activities. The situation at the border is a crisis, and drug traffickers are exploiting the chaos to conduct illegal activities. On February 9th, I, along with over 50 Republican members of Congress, wrote to President Biden about the rising crisis at our southern border, which must be taken seriously if we're going to address the use and abuse of fentanyl and other dangerous drugs in our communities. We must not treat this as a political game. We must not allow drug traffickers to be empowered by soft border policies that overlook enforcement of our laws.
Now it's my pleasure to yield to the distinguished ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The chairman of the full committee talked about smart, effective action to deal with the drug crisis. Smart, effective action would be to get control of our border, as the ranking member, Mr. Biggs, highlighted in his opening statement. It's about time that the full committee have a hearing on something. I would suggest the border crisis would be a great issue to have a hearing on. Maybe the cancel culture, which is denying people their First Amendment free speech rights, would be a good issue to have a full committee hearing on. There's lots of things we can be discussing, but we have yet now, 2 months into the Congress, had a full Judiciary Committee hearing, the busiest committee typically in all of Congress, the committee charged with protecting people's liberties. We got a crisis on our border. We got a crisis with people attacking the First Amendment free speech rights of Americans, and we've yet to have a hearing. So maybe we should be doing that at some point here. But I think obviously right now the border crisis is front and center, and this is something that we need to get a handle on if we're going to ever have a chance to deal with the drug issues that confront so many of our communities.
We now welcome all of our distinguished witnesses, and we thank them for their participation. Derek Maltz spent 28 years in public service with the Drug Enforcement Administration, including 10 years as a special agent in charge for the Special Operations Division of the Department of Justice. He now serves as the Executive Director for Government Relations at Penley. Mr. Maltz, we thank you for your service to this country.
Chairman Nadler, Chair Jackson Lee, ranking members Biggs and Jordan, thank you very much for having me here today to speak to you on this ongoing drug crisis in America. I was fortunate to be the agent in charge of DEA Special Operations Division for 10 years. I retired in 2014. The operation had representatives from 30 agencies. We worked very hard to synchronize the efforts to go after transnational criminals around the world. Prior to that, I was the chief of the country's oldest and largest drug task force in New York City. I had the honor to work with the most dedicated American heroes who sacrificed daily to keep Americans safe. As a DEA special agent for 28 years, I was paid to enforce the laws of the country enacted by Congress and to protect Americans. I'm not here representing DEA. I'm a private citizen who cares deeply about American people, the public safety and national security of the country. I'm here to share information about the growing drug crisis and how it's impacting communities all over the country. After my DEA career, I continue to engage with law enforcement daily to stay current on the trends. I've always been a huge advocate of working together as a team and applying a true unity of effort. However, right now, we need more of a whole-of-government approach, but rather a whole-of-American approach, as a drug crisis impacts all citizens and all communities. Too many young Americans are dying from this poison. According to the recent data from CDC, in the 12-month period ending July of 2020, 83,000 Americans died from drug overdoses. That's 227 a day. This represents the largest number of drug overdoses ever. I lost my brother Michael in the U.S. Air Force pararescue during Operation Enduring Freedom, so I know what it's like to bury a loved one. However, there's nothing more sad than when you watch family members of these kids that have promising futures. We cannot expect to end the drug crisis with law enforcement alone. We need robust education, treatment, rehabilitation, combined with law enforcement to curtail this emerging crisis. Addicted people do need help. However, we cannot treat somebody in the morgue that already died from fentanyl poisoning. We need smart Americans from private sector in many industries to help provide solutions. We cannot sit back and watch these precious lives be lost. As law enforcement works to shut down the chemicals flowing to China and Mexico and billions of dollars to the ruthless, greedy transnational crime networks in Mexico, we need addiction specialists, teachers, medical professionals, mental health professionals, and others to step up with solutions. There must be a true team, coordinated effort with Congress and all of these great Americans that care about the country. The killing of the Americans at record levels has to stop. Government officials leading this effort must be held accountable for results, not just papers and statistics, but results. These American transnational criminal organizations are not just engaging in drug trafficking, they're involved in arms trafficking, human smuggling, extortion, kidnapping, child molesting, child exploitation, and other crimes to maximize profit. They use the latest and greatest technology, taking advantage of our antiquated laws and weaknesses. Hezbollah terrorists are working with the Mexican cartels, moving millions and millions of dollars around the world, and tons of cocaine. What keeps me up at night, though, is listening to the families who lost their loved ones from fentanyl poisoning. Many of these citizens took a pill and had no idea the pill contained pure fentanyl, and it came from labs in Mexico or chemical companies in China. The Chinese criminals have stepped up their game, and they're big time involved with the drug business, and now they're involved with taking over the money laundering services business for the cartels. They also provide the dangerous chemicals and starting to dominate in other areas of the drug trade. Without the money and chemicals, the cartels can't produce the deadly drugs. There's no quality control of these chemicals in the pills. And remember, 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, can kill 500,000 people, according to the experts. To be clear, counterfeit pills with fentanyl and fentanyl mixed with other drugs is what's causing the alarming crisis right now with drugs. DEA Phoenix seized 6 million Mexi-Oxy pills last year, counterfeit pills with fentanyl. That means that DEA and their partners potentially saved over 1 million people's lives because those pills kill instantly. As we sit here today, we're dealing with a full-blown national security and public health emergency, as well as a huge humanitarian crisis on the border. Our brave men and women at CBP are transitioning from border to security to migrant care. That's no good. The Mexican transnational criminal organizations are taking full advantage of that, and they're flooding the zone. They're flooding the country with drugs and people. They can easily send special agent aliens into the country with dangerous drugs as they import guns and cash into Mexico. We need Congress to support law enforcement, provide the tools and resources to battle these dangerous adversaries and very complex criminals. The country is very vulnerable if the good guys don't have the tools. And right now, they're losing the tools in their toolbox. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today on this important topic, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I now recognize the ranking member for his questions for 5 minutes, Mr. Biggs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Maltz, I'm sure you've seen recent news stories about the growing crisis at the southern border, and you touched on it in your opening statement. And my question for you is, what impact does this surge of illegal border crossers at the border have on DEA's, CBP's, and other federal agencies' ability to conduct enforcement operations to deter and interdict drug trafficking?
Well, right now, we have a situation where CBP has gone from border security and protecting Americans to migrant care workers. That's unacceptable because we have families all over this country, and I do this every day. I get pictures from families of their children that are dying from fentanyl. They have record-level seizures of fentanyl. As an example, in February, so far this year, there's over 4,000 pounds of fentanyl been seized. 1 kilogram of fentanyl kills 500,000 people. So we have a crisis. We have radical open border policies that will not work when it comes to national security and public health. And we have to deal with this. One thing I will say was an observation I made today, that walls and fences must work because it took me an hour and 15 minutes to walk from the garage to get here. So walls should be put up on the border, and we need to keep the migrants going through a legal process.
So one of the things, Mr. Maltz, that you talked about is you talked about flooding the zone. And a lot of people don't understand what flooding the zone is in border crossing, and we're talking between ports of entry. To express to us what flooding the zone means and how it facilitates criminal cartels using now vacated areas to smuggle in dangerous drugs.
So flooding the zone is basically a way that these business operations can make lots of money. They're charging the migrants thousands of dollars. If it's a special interest alien from certain parts of the world, it may be $9,000. So they're making money on the migrants coming up. They gather the migrants together. They watch where the Border Patrol is. They blitz the Border Patrol agents so they're totally focused on the migrants. And then they send the drugs and the people, many times special interest aliens, through these open areas. And then on top of that, the cash and the guns come southbound. So they take advantage of the vulnerability. That's what criminal networks do. They take advantage of weaknesses. And that's a weakness in our country at the border.
So federal agencies put out press releases several times a week touting drug seizures, kind of like what you see behind me. This is from Phoenix and Yuma. Can you estimate what percentage of drugs, people, and other contraband crossing our border are interdicted by federal agencies?
Look, I'm no expert on, border interdiction statistics, but I've heard for many, many years in the DEA, like 10% is seized, right? So if you look at, just as an example, in January, there were 1,950 pounds of meth in Dallas, 2,500 pounds in El Paso in December. Another 1,900 pounds were seized in Texas. In Los Angeles, they had record seizures of meth, 2,000 pounds, another 3,000 in San Diego. So lots of meth, lots of fentanyl, lots of cocaine, lots of marijuana are getting in there. But the thing that concerns me the most are the counterfeit pills that are disguised as what they call Mexi-Oxy 30s. They're the blue pills that the kids are taking, and they have no idea it's poison. It's pure fentanyl in many cases. There's no quality control. They don't have chemists that sit there like FDA and regulate the amount of fentanyl. They're just trying to make as much money as they can, and it's killing Americans at record levels.
And Mr. Maltz, as we get toward the end of your testimony, or my opportunity to ask you questions, you talk to the parents of victims of overdose and drug use on a regular basis, daily.
Right, and that's why I'm here, by the way. My passion is for the American people and the public and public safety. I'm not here getting paid. I have no agenda. This is Joseph Dean from Connecticut, 23-year-old. The mother had to put up billboards in Connecticut to get the attention about how bad this crisis is, the murders with fentanyl. These are all the pictures I get from families every day on Facebook. I don't look at the race and the background of these people. I'll take any photo that they send to get the word out there. These kids are dead, and they're not going to come back. They don't have a future because of this poisonous chemical coming from labs in Mexico.
Madam Chair, I request without objection that his three visual aids be admitted into the record. Thank you. And with that, I thank you, Mr. Maltz. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll yield back.
It's my pleasure to now yield to the gentleman from Ohio, the distinguished gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Chabot, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Mr. Maltz, I want to begin by thanking you for your years of service at the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, for everything that you and your men and women there did to protect the American public and save lives. So thank you very much for that. My first question, I believe it was posited by the other side a while back that essentially, if we legalized or decriminalized drugs, we probably have less of that coming in at our southern border. Yet there are quite a few states now that have legalized marijuana, and the amounts coming in at the southern border has continued to be on the rise. So is that your understanding?
Yes, of course, but it's not just coming in from the southern border. Chinese nationals are buying real estate all over America, and they're making these unbelievable marijuana grow houses in beautiful communities, and they're selling very high pure THC marijuana to people all over America.
Thank you very much. My next question, would you agree that drug trafficking goes hand in hand with human trafficking, that we have a real crisis at our southern border when we turn detention centers into reception centers now, and when we basically say, come on in, and people are coming in, they're listening, and they think they can stay. And you mentioned it took you an hour and 15 minutes, I think it was, to get beyond the walls and barbed wire that we have around this facility now here in Congress, yet construction on the wall at our southern border has been stopped, ceased, terminated, at least during this administration. Again, going back to my original question, does drug trafficking and human trafficking go hand in hand?
Yes, I mean, the Mexican cartels are transnational criminal organizations. They're in the business to make money. They're charging these poor migrants thousands of dollars to be escorted up to the border. They're using them. They're tagging them now. They're putting wristbands on them so they can keep track of the money owed. So if they don't pay the money, their families or they die. And so you also had that incident in January where there were a 2,000-mile journey from Guatemala. There were 19 migrants murdered and burned to a crisp because they didn't pay their taxes to the cartels. And so it's a very, very dangerous situation. It is a huge humanitarian crisis, and it's really, really sad.
Thank you very much. And I read your statement before you came, and you only get 5 minutes, so you don't have a chance to get all of that in there. So one of the things you mentioned in there that I thought was worth bringing up here is the sicarios, which a lot of people may not necessarily be familiar with the term, but essentially, drug thugs, hitmen, muscle that are training young, impressionable, drug dealers who get across our border, come here, and are setting up shop in cities across the country. And the propensity for violence that these people are equipped with and willing to do. Could you discuss that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Mexican cartels are hiring former military and police officers, and obviously the corruption is through the roof in Mexico, so they're paying these people a lot more than they would get paid in the police jobs or, military. And then they get trained in professional facilities, they have indoor ranges, they have plenty of ammunition, and then they recruit kids, these young kids that just want to make some money, and they go out and they just start killing people. And it's very dangerous because they don't just kill people with guns. They chop people up. They hang people's heads from bridges, from fence posts. They send heads in coolers with blood to people to intimidate. They tie notes over people. There was one famous case where they roll heads on the dance floor. But then they make their way into the country, and then there's some violence in our country. There's spillover violence in the country, depending on how you define that word. Some people define the word as deliberate attacks against U.S. people. I don't see too much of that, but I see, cartel violence, right, at levels we've never seen. And I could talk all day about the stuff I witnessed when I was the head of the SOD operation.
And before I run out of time here, you had mentioned when you were testifying before that you're losing the tools in your toolbox. Could you tell us what you...
Oh, absolutely. One of the best techniques that law enforcement has is infiltrating communications pursuant to federal court orders. Very lengthy process. You don't just flip a switch and listen to somebody's phone. Unfortunately, because our laws are so outdated, the bad guys are using advanced encryption technology, and we can't infiltrate the communications. We have communications going on every day of the week in advanced communications, encrypted apps. And if we have a court order, if we have the probable cause, and the judge signs the order, we can't get the content. That's a problem, and that's a problem for every American. That's not a problem just for DEA. It's a problem for everyone in this room because child molesters, robbers, murderers, rapists. They're all using these apps. So law enforcement can't track these criminals. They're predators in the community. So it's a big problem, yes.
Thank you very much. My time's expired, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, I'd also like to thank all of our witnesses for your time and your testimony. It is extremely important that we have this discussion, this hearing, and also hear your expertise and perspective. I want to begin my comments with this. I've witnessed the devastating effects of drugs in communities, devastating effects on families, individuals, and those communities. I want to quote former Police Chief David Brown when he was with Dallas. He said this: "Every societal failure we put on the cops or the criminal justice system to solve. Not enough mental health funding? Give it to the police. Not enough drug addiction treatment funding? Let the police handle it." We say in Orange County, Florida, that the Orange County Jail is the biggest mental health treatment facility and the biggest drug treatment facility in the region. Chief Brown went on to say, "Schools fail. Call the police, let them handle it." He said, "This is too much to ask." What I believe, based on my experience as a 27-year law enforcement officer, is that the criminal justice system is left to solve problems that government has failed to address.
Mr. Maltz, you were talking about the horrendous corruption in Mexico. I know you were with the DEA for a long time. Have you ever traveled to Mexico?
Yes, sir.
And they've got hardworking people there, right?
Absolutely.
And of course, I think it's wonderful when the majority of the people have a faith in God, which is what I find in Hispanics and Central Americans. And also they have a love of family. It seems that the number one problem that's keeping Mexico, Central America, from being some of the most vibrant economies in the world, one thing, and you touched on it, the massive amount of corruption. Are you aware of corruption from any source in Mexico besides the drug cartels?
I mean, I'm aware of the massive corruption up to the top in the Mexican government. The DEA actually recently had a major success with the arrest of the former defense secretary, Cienfuegos. They indicted him in the Eastern District of New York, and he was running the country's army, okay? Also, Genaro Garcia...
Literally running the country, Mexico's army?
He was running the army, but working with the cartels. And Genaro Garcia Luna was running their public safety. He was arrested and is in jail in America. So the corruption is off the charts with the cartels. If you paid attention to the Chapo Guzman trial in New York, there were allegations of the bribes they were making even to the former president of Mexico. Okay? So, yeah, it's off the charts, and they get all the money from America, and the money doesn't go to the people, it goes to the corrupt politicians.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned about people, and I've spent lots of nights on the border, days, but also all night, many times, and I've been there as they go through, the Border Patrol goes through the questions, and they have their checklist, but a lot of times they'll add questions like, how much did you pay to, and the money all ends up going to the cartels. They sometimes pay coyotes or gang members to get them across. But most of the time, they'll say $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. And when the Border Patrolman says, you don't have that kind of money, well, I'm going to be able to pay it off when I get where I'm going. I've seen them, people standing in line waiting to be asked, they're in processing questions, and they're passing addresses. Oh, I like yours better, and they're switching addresses. They apparently are given addresses where they're supposed to go to sell drugs or be involved in sex trafficking, whatever, and they're given the location of the city and place they're supposed to go. You've seen that, I'm sure.
Right, and that's what I was talking about before. The most recent is the wristbands. They're giving them wristbands, and they're finding wristbands, which is actually tracking them as commodities. And if they don't pay, their families are in danger, and they're in danger when they come back one day, or if they're even in the U.S., they're in danger.
Well, I have read estimates like $80 billion just on drug trafficking that the cartels bring in. Now that they've been in human trafficking for a while, it's amazing. What a business model. Your employees pay you to be indentured servants for the future. What would happen if we completely secured, not closed, but secured our southern border? What would happen to the cartels in Mexico?
Well, the cartels are very innovative. They would figure out ways to get their supply to the unbelievable demand we have in America, but it would cause a lot of stress for them at the border. They would start using different methods, tunnels, and they'd use container ships.
Yeah, but we've got technology now, if we would use it, that not just the microphones underground like the old days in West Berlin, but we have some really good methods of detecting tunnels.
Absolutely.
There's technology that we have now we didn't used to have. Wouldn't you surely agree that if we completely secured the border, including a very strong program to find out tunnels, it would minimize the amount of money that's pouring into the drug cartels and severely limit the corruption there?
Absolutely. They need the people here to run their operations in almost every city in America. This is not just the big cities, New York and Chicago and Los Angeles. This is cities all throughout America. So they need the people. So if the people are here, they have trusted confidants to work as leaders of their cartel in our different cities. So the people are so important, and that's what they're doing. They're taking advantage of the wide open border.
Thank
time
you
is
for allowing me the extra 27 seconds. I know it wasn't 56 like yours, but thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Walls work, fences work, and if walls and fences and razor wire didn't work, then why did Speaker Pelosi erect fencing, razor wire, and deploy National Guard troops around the Capitol? Yet President Biden is doing the complete opposite on the border, and it's literally killing Americans. Literally. I have the honor of representing Florida in the 17th District of Florida. Florida alone had 5,268 overdoses just in 2019. 35 people died of an overdose in Florida every single day in 2019. Opioid deaths more than tripled in Florida between 2000 and 2016, according to a state government report. And Central Florida drug overdoses deaths were up as much as 70% during the COVID-19 pandemic. The amount of fentanyl that has been seized on the border in just the first 5 months of 2021 is 4,552 pounds of fentanyl, which will kill hundreds of thousands of Americans. All last year in 2020 at the southwest border, 4,544 pounds of fentanyl was seized. So in the first 5 months of this year, we have seized more fentanyl at the border than at the entire year last year in 2020. And it is continuing and continuing to kill Americans and to kill Floridians. Now, I don't understand. The first witness talked about racism and white supremacy, and fentanyl doesn't know what color you are. And in fact, deaths in Florida, there's 13 times more whites than have died than African Americans in the state of Florida. And I personally don't think that it matters what color you are. We should be strong and hard on people who are killing Americans and dealing in dangerous drugs on our streets. Regardless of the color they are, they should go to prison. And like reforms that we've made in Florida, if you're dealing in opioids and fentanyl and people die as a result to you dealing, you should go to prison for life. And those are a lot of changes that we made in Florida when I was in the state legislature. Mr. Maltz, I'd like to, with those facts and numbers in mind, what are some immediate actions that the federal law enforcement can take to address this problem at the Mexican border?
Well, first of all, you have to secure the border. You can't allow these people coming in that are carrying these dangerous fentanyl pills that are killing kids immediately. And I agree with your point 100%. The charts that I have with these family members here, it's red, white, and blue. It's not red against blue. has nothing to do with race or color. It has to do with just these Mexican terrorist criminal organizations that want to make billions of dollars. There's a reason Chapo Guzman was on Forbes' most, richest people in the world. They make a lot of money, they take advantage, they destroy families, they destroy communities. So we could definitely shut the border. We also have to get together with the different professionals, the mental health professionals, addiction specialists. We have to have accountability on these programs. We can't just throw money at the programs and then say it's going to go away. It will only go away with strong leaders, and we have to hold people accountable. So that's something we could do. We have to get full cooperation between all of our agencies. We have to have the focus on the people that are dying, not getting a job when you leave government or getting a job in the private industry. It has to be about saving lives.
In your written testimony, you went into detail about the barbaric tactics used by the Mexican drug cartels, beheadings and torture displayed on social media, indoctrination camps to desensitize new recruits, including child soldiers, taking over huge areas of land while destroying roads and buildings with impunity, creating their own pseudo-religious teachings to brainwash members. You even compare them to Al-Qaeda. From a law enforcement perspective, how important is it that these individuals are not allowed to cross from Mexico into the United States?
Well, first of all, I was one of the advocates of declaring the Mexican cartels as terrorists because they are terrorists, the way they're killing, the way they're destroying families, they're taking advantage of society. But in regards to the cartel's violence, what about the stew maker dropping people in acid? So the the murder statistics in Mexico is very misleading. We have we have so many people that have disappeared because they drop them in acid. And so, the violence is off the charts, and these people are narco-terrorists. That's what they are, and they need to be dealt with accordingly.
Are the current Biden policies at the border doing a good job of making sure that that Mexican drug lords don't get across the border?
Absolutely not. I mean, when you tell the world that coming to America, everything's free, meanwhile, our schools are closed and families are destroyed because businesses have been closed, it's not fair to the hardworking American people. And I have to say, this is a message to the world. That's why they're lining up in record numbers. It's common sense. You don't have to be an expert.
Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
And Mr. Maltz, thank you for being here, and thank you for serving our country for so many years and still today. I think the humanitarian crisis that's going on at the border is well documented here in this hearing, and the flooding of our streets with drugs, the imported violence as a result of the Mexican drug cartels. And as we watch the Biden-created crisis at our southern border, the number of drugs that will be flooding through our borders is alarming. As you know, the drugs don't cross over by themselves. The effects aren't only limited to our southwestern border states, but are as far-reaching as my home state of Wisconsin. It costs Wisconsin's taxpayers over $10 billion a year to fund health care, emergency care, and other resources for the victims of this crisis. The highest overdose rates are in economically distressed areas that have experienced high rates of unemployment. These areas seem to have a steady supply of fentanyl and heroin, like coming from our southern border. Yet the latest statistics from Immigration and Customs Enforcement indicate an almost 66% drop in arrests at the border in February compared to December of 2020. I assure you that this drastic drop isn't because less immigrants are coming across the border. Mr. Maltz, you've noted that the cartels have formed a partnership with Chinese organized crime networks and that they pose a significant threat to public health, safety, and national security, and that they use sophisticated technology and take advantage of antiquated laws and policies in the U.S. First question for you. Some say interdiction at the border makes no difference, that the drugs will keep coming into our country even if interdiction goes away, or even if interdiction is improved. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely not. Interdiction saves lives every day.
What laws or policies need updating? So I think you've done a pretty good job of drawing that nexus of, this is not just the Mexican cartels. There's a Chinese government that's involved also. And so what laws or policies do you think need to be updated for us to be more effective?
Well, first of all, it's about the terrorists as well. Like Hezbollah is one of the world's most capable terrorist organizations, and we had Project Cassandra, where they were moving used cars out of America to support Hezbollah to fight and to carry out their agenda. So in this country, we have to first recognize that this is not just, drugs on the streets. It's about a global network of transnational criminals that want to destroy the country. It's a much bigger problem. But we have to realize, like in the Chinese scenario, the chemicals are just coming in ton quantities into Mexico. That's why we're seeing the huge amounts of methamphetamine. They produce like 7 tons of meth every 3 days. When I was a young agent, if you seized a kilo of meth, that was a huge case. Now we're seizing 2,000 and 3,000 pounds of meth. So the business operation is booming, the demand is booming, but it's all these other countries that are making money, and these groups are making money on the problem.
Thank you. So I would just like to share with the committee, in Wisconsin, we had when I was in the state legislature, I served for nearly 10 years, we created something called the Hope Agenda, and it was really groundbreaking in the country. A number of other states have taken a look at what we did, and we did things like create drug courts, expand drug courts, get assistance to help those with addiction. But we spent an enormous amount of time and money in order to create that agenda, do it in a smart way, to be able to help people with this problem. And we heard from local sheriffs regularly about the drugs that were being pumped up from the southern border, as well as the human trafficking that was going on in their communities. And they were emphasizing that to us regularly, and we tried to implement policies to help fight back on that. So I guess in conclusion, I would just say here, Madam Chair, it is so disappointing that the president, the first thing he did was cancel a pipeline that works for America, but then he enables a pipeline for drugs to the rest of America that's going to kill Americans, that he won't put a stop to that pipeline flowing from our southern border. I yield back.
Thank you very much for holding this very, very important hearing. I'm out of Orange County, California. I also have a good relationship with the local police officers, good police officers, and it breaks my heart to know that we're giving them the impossible job of fixing our societal problems of homelessness, drug addiction, and mental health. Excuse me, is it a medical or criminal issue?
Addiction's a medical issue, of course.
Mr. Maltz, if we seal the southern border, will that stop Americans from using illegal drugs?
It will help.
So Chinese chemicals, precursors that don't come in through Mexico, they won't come through Canada?
They might.
Might. Would you consider the Canadian border secure?
I don't think it's very secure
no?
because resources are going to the southern border now.
So they're both insecure. Would you consider our Atlantic and Pacific ports secure when it comes to drug trade, Mr. Maltz?
CBP needs more resources to secure these borders. It's impossible to do it with what they have.
Secure, yes? Are they secure, yes or no?
They're doing a great job, absolutely.
So the ports are secure from drug trade?
Not totally secure, but they're making a lot of seizures.
Yes? Yes or no? Okay. And finally, Mr. Maltz, America is good when it puts its focus on a certain effort. A few decades ago, we essentially sealed off the Caribbean when it came to drug trade. We're pretty good at sealing that up. But what we ended up doing was really diverting that drug trade inland. In that process, we essentially destabilized the countries of a whole continent, Mexico and Central America, and yet the drugs kept flowing. That's why I'm saying this drug trade, this drug war, 4, 5, 6 decades has not worked. And my question to you, sir, do you think sealing the Mexican border will bring us success when it comes to the drug war?
100% it will help. It's not going to solve the problem.
So Americans will stop using drugs once you seal the Mexican border?
I never said that.
You have 15 seconds or so to wrap up anything that you're trying to say during that last interaction, or you're okay?
I mean, obviously, sealing the border is not going to stop the addiction all over America because it's been out of control for so many years. We didn't put the money into the education, to the treatment, to the rehabilitation. We ignored it. All these poor people got addicted, and the cartels took complete advantage of the addicted population to make billions of dollars. But securing the border is going to help keep these poisonous drugs out of the country, yes.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm glad we're having this conversation. It's a very important issue to me. I grew up in the 1960s segregated community where the progress into the black middle class was an expectation for us. Our family unit was strong, and drugs simply were not a part of our everyday life. Over the last few decades since, I witnessed friends, NFL careers lost, families destroyed by drug abuse. It is a fact that the least control we have over our borders, the more control Mexican drug cartels have on bringing misery to both my state and the black community. Here are a few statistics that have been really troubling to me. Fact, illegal drug use among blacks is 23% higher than the general population and whites. Fact, 78% of the overdose in Washington, D.C. are African Americans. Fact, in D.C., opioid overdose deaths among black men between ages of 40 to 69 increased 245% between 2014 and 2017. Fact, in Utah, 473 drug overdose deaths involved opioids in 2018. With that in mind, Mr. Maltz, the smuggling of drugs along the southwest border by the Mexican cartel is one of the greatest threats to the American dream. What is the most important thing the federal government can do today to stop the flow of drugs into our country?
Well, for one, they have to talk about the issues with drugs. It's not just overprescribing. That's 15, 20 years ago. We never dealt with that as a country. They have to get people help. They have to unite all the smart people in America that have good ideas, but we have to shut down that border, and we have to show the American public we care about the families that are being destroyed. We have to take this serious. Right now, people just seem to think it's going to go away. It's going to get worse every day. More and more of these kids are going to die. And by the way, fentanyl doesn't care what color you are. It's going to kill you if you snort it, right? If you take fentanyl, there's a good chance you're going to die. And sadly, most of the kids don't even know what they're taking. And the cartels are making billions off this.
Do you have any insight into the drug trafficking path into the inner part of our United States? For states like mine that are not on the border, but are still being impacted by this process of drugs coming through our borders?
Well, the Sinaloa cartel and Jalisco New Generation cartel are throughout all the American cities, right? They have command and control set up in some of the bigger cities, like in Chicago and Arizona and Los Angeles and New York and Atlanta. And what they're doing is they're spreading out their command and control. With the people that are coming over the border, they're setting them up in these different cities, and they basically have the opportunity to push drugs on the streets all over. They're pushing their drugs to gangs, right? The Chapo Guzman case, if you look into that, it was the Sinaloa cartel providing all these drugs to the gangs on the west side of Chicago. So it goes from the command and control in Mexico right to the command and control in these hub cities and right into your city.
So in other words, zip code is not a protection against these drugs coming on our south.
There's no boundary, sir.
Okay. What is the connection between the border security and the prevalence of illegal drugs in urban America? Those that are most at risk, those communities that I've just listed are being hit the hardest. What is the connection between our security at the border and that of impacting the communities that we should all be caring about at this point?
Well, like we said all day so far, like when the border's open, these people can get in here, they bring the fentanyl pills, they distribute the pills all over the cities, and people are dying. So everybody's vulnerable. This is poison in counterfeit pills. If you take a pill and you think it's a legitimate OxyContin, but it has fentanyl that was put in it from a lab in Mexico, you're going to die. And so everybody's vulnerable.
Let me just wrap up with this. The greatest thing about our country is the access to American dream, the middle class. And I think Americans need to understand this is a way to negate our middle class. Have death, misery, and addiction, and it's coming through a border where people are taking advantage of our good hearts. So at the end of the day, we need to shut the border down. I totally agree. We need to take a look at what the problem is when we're having another generation being addicted to drugs that they don't need to be and they should not be, and we should be protecting them from. With that, I'll go back.
Thank you, Chairwoman Jackson Lee, for holding this important hearing. I want to thank all their panelists for your time and expertise today. My first question is to Mr. Maltz. I believe in response to a question from Congressman Correa, you had stated that if someone's addicted, jail time is not the answer. Am I saying that accurately?
My opinion is if somebody's addicted, they need help from an addiction specialist, a medical specialist, a social worker. Putting them in jail is not going to help the problem.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Mr. Maltz, my clarifying question for you is, in response to something that Professor Harris said when she talked about the increase in drug trafficking is in part, at least, due to prohibition policies with regard to drugs. And that's an interesting, there is an interesting contraindication. In some corridors right now, the #1 drug being illegally transited into the United States is marijuana. And this is the case, well, and in Colorado, they've seen an increase in black market marijuana. And this is the case even though marijuana is legalized in many states, including Colorado. And the rationale that has been suggested, not today by anybody on the panel, but in other studies that I've read, is that domestic pot costs more because of taxes and regulatory schemes, and that because of those additional tax burdens and regulatory burdens, what we see is it is still cheaper for cartels to transit a pot across the border where they can't create the grow houses that they're creating in the United States. Is that accurate?
Yes, I mean, the people that are using marijuana do not want to pay these exorbitant prices that they would have to pay because of the taxes. So the black market's going to explode, and the Chinese and the cartels are going to continue to get the marijuana into the United States. We see the same thing with cigarette trafficking, right? People don't want to pay $13 a pack of cigarettes in New York City, so they buy the cigarettes in the black market. This is nothing new, and it's going to continue.
Maltz, very quickly, you indicated that you were being stifled through some technology in terms of what information you can secure. And I want to make it very clear, against the murderous big guys like the cartels. What was that specifically that you said that you were being stymied because of the encrypted aspects of what of the work that you were trying to do, or what you were trying to obtain?
Thank you for the concern. So obviously the communications are very vital to a law enforcement investigation. And if the bad guys are using encrypted apps that are being used every day all over America, law enforcement's not going to be able to intercept the content pursuant to a federal court order. So we have to look closer at the encryption issue with these new types of technologies.
Excellent, thank you. I wanted to clarify that for the record.
Thank you.
Ensure all of us against the murderous bad guys. Thank you so very much. Let me indicate that we appreciate very much the witnesses who have been very open and very provocative and very thorough. Let me thank Nicole Austin Hillary, Executive Director of the Human Rights Watch, Dr. Howard Henderson, Director of the Center for Justice Research, Texas Southern University, Derek Maltz, 28 years in public service with DEA, and Dr. Catherine Neal Harris, the Alfred C. Glassell III Fellow in Drug Policy at Rice University. Thank you very much for your testimony. This concludes today's hearing. Thank you to our distinguished witnesses for attending. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions that the witness or additional materials for the record.